Welcome to another episode of Mind Matters with Dan Ploger and myself, John Krotek. This is the show where we provoke listeners to critically think, to use logic and reason, and a bit of common sense when contemplating the critical issues that affect all of us in society. Thank you for joining us on this special episode of Mind Matters, where we discuss the soil of our souls and the dirt on our fingers. Again, another episode of Mind Matters, but this is really cool today. I'm super stoked. I'm here with Dan Ploger, as always, my co-host, but we have a really special guest, Army brother, partner in crime, a guy who understands what it's like to see combat firsthand and then to come back and reintegrate back into the world. We're calling this the dirt of the soul. Rick says the soil of the soul. Dan might have another definition, but Rick Harrienger, right here, U.S. Army veteran, combat veteran, just like Dan, U.S. Army veteran, combat veteran. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I don't speak that language. My dirt, my soul, my soil is a little bit different. But the hope today with today's episode was for these gentlemen and brothers to share some of their souls, whether it's poetry form or essay form, it doesn't matter. What matters is that they're here and they're survivors and they have stories to share, and those kinds of things can help people. Both of these guys I look up to tremendously. They're mentors of mine in a real sense. And, I'm just honored and privileged to be able to be here myself and to talk with these guys. So welcome, listeners. Thank you for your support. But more so, Dan, thanks for coming back, man, my co-host. And Rick, we've been trying to get for months, and we have finally synced up, and here we are today. So welcome to the show, Rick.
Well, thank you both. And welcome to anybody that might be interested in exploring the parameters of the invisible wound. As we talked a little bit before your introduction, there are aspects of my life that I've connected to, not only why I'm still here, but why I survived the NAM in the first place. It was like I have a poem that I'll start with that happened to be right here in Florida, in your hometown, not your hometown specifically, but your area of Florida. It's called the Dale County Blues. I learned a thing or two about a swing blade down in Florida as a kid, on a prison farm as a runaway, doing a back-to-back vagrancy bid. A blade well honed is like a metronome as it cuts through the wheat and the weeds. With all you've done with your back to the sun is just freed a million more seeds. It don't make no matter mine, we'll be back another time, a thrashing with the Lord set to grow. A swing blade swung with ease cuts as neat as you please, lending order to this old country road. I saw a man engrave a plate for $1 bill, just to have something to do. He did it on an old lead toothpaste tube, and it might seem pointless to you. You might think a man do a thing like that, straight up fool or insane. But when you're doing time, it makes a lot of things rhyme. When all you've got's a number for a name. Now he was chained up tight to the bed at night, so just getting loose took a bit. And if the boss had come around a little early on his round and caught him with that contraband shit, he'd be headed off for Folsom on a bid that would have hold him, but it only up the ante notch or two. It's all part of doing time. It helps you keep your mind. that the walking bus and prison men do. Now, the way that relates to the ditties I create and the story that I tell you here is it's filling up the seconds and the minutes and the hours as I struggle through the days of the year.
Yeah. Intense, man. That's very insightful, and it just brings to mind so many things. You know, it titillates the soul. And it does. It makes you think. It makes me think of gratitude right away. You know, grateful that somebody has the heart to share something like that, you know, in written form, but also how lucky I have it in my own life, even with my own travesties. What do you think, Dan?
Awesome. I mean, that was great, Rick. I'm speechless. Terrific. Thanks for that. Wow.
Like I prefaced it, you know, it's one of the reasons that I survived Vietnam was that I had already been an adult since I was about 12, 13 years old.
Right.
You know, and I even carried the brogue and the mannerisms of a young man from Ireland because I had a phony ID that said my name was Garrett Kane and I was from County Cork. And I was already 6'3" and about 200 pounds, and I spoke with a brogue and a mannerism, and no one thought a thing of it at all. You know, it's just I flipped so dramatically the way you have to when you're living a lie or living a false identity that it kind of prepared me for the flip into military life in a way that other guys weren't.
You know? I think that when you live that illusory or live in that illusory place, we're all in this mode of survival. And for you, for me, and for Dan at times, you know, it's always been about writing and how do we get this out? And I can remember, it's funny, Rick, but I can remember having an accent at times of somebody who wasn't me, you know, just to survive that moment or to come to grips with whatever it was that I was trying to overcome. Yeah, the soil of the soul and the dirt of the soul is something that we all have our hands in. And it's just powerful stuff, man. It's powerful stuff.
It is. I love the adjective, the flippant military, and how well that just struck me as, yes, it was flippant. We were in a world that there's death all around us. We faced death with every step, and we really didn't give a shit. It was just, and nobody cared, it seemed. Very well said.
I have a poem that I'd like to share. And it's a combat poem, something that I've never been in, but I dwelled upon the little bit that I do know. It's called Game Over, Camo Works. Crazy how we'd lay there for what seemed like forever, gathering intel. The bad guys would move around as if they owned the place. So nonchalant, scurrying to and fro, moving ordnance, an RPG, maybe two, lots of AKs. Sometimes they'd even have a hop in their skip. Most of the time, when we saw them like that, we'd bag them in an airstrike. Game over. Camo works. That camouflage that we find ourselves with in our lives,
yeah,
can be a great benefit to us, can it?
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's like we were trained to be sensitive to our surrounding, and the the propensity to become a chameleon is almost automatic. And that's, yeah, that fit in perfectly with my childhood. I was raised in a dysfunctional family that, I had nothing to contribute, I had nothing to say, I didn't need to feel that way, and if I loved my mother I wouldn't feel that way, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it you reminded me of the mother of the MIA, the the poem in my book where I talk about Soldier Blue. It the backstory to that is that when the trip flares went off, it turned our camouflage paint blue. The what Willie Phosphorus in the green camo or brown camo, it turned blue. That's why his name is Blue in that poem.
Yeah. Well, can you share that?
Okay, well, it's a tough one. I don't mind sharing it with you, but I want to make sure that I I I warn our brother Dan there to guard his heart, because this is a heavy one.
Okay.
um, I sat on the side of a mountain with whom I can't recall, struck by the added irony. I never knew his name at all. We'd already set our ambush on the trail down below, 4 dissecting claymores with flares across the row. This night wasn't any different than 100 nights before. Someone goes out right and left, and we wire up the back door. I let up the straps of my rucksack and set it behind a tree, set back down and into it, so it's retaining me. Don't want to get rolling around up here at night. It's 50 feet straight down. These jump wings may mean a lot of things, but one of them's don't clown. I think I was going to be 19 next week, but I felt like 100 then. Been thinking about my time as a runaway. Been 20 since way back when. We opened up some C's and copped some Z's till the hour when the sun went down. He did the same, old soldier, what's his name, till the old man's 20 brought us round. Brake squelched twice. Well, ain't that nice? We've reestablished contact with the troops. But out to my front, me and my grunt are staring at the sun as it droops. It's the end of the day when Charlie likes to play. Mentally, it's time to buckle down and memorize the trees and the direction of the breeze, and paint our faces up with green and brown. It's funny how the jungle ineffably can jumble your senses with the loss of sight. Your hair stand up stiff and your nose begins to sniff, and desperate as you need another night. If Charlie was around, he couldn't make that sound. Imagination exudes a pound of fright. But the hunter moves away in search of other prey in the deadly one-act play of nature's right. About 2:30, the trip flares blew, half blowing night back into day. And from their hats, I knew it was Charlie who, a millisecond later, I'd splay. Then the thunderous bark, an electric arc, and the air sucked right out of your chest. And you can't hear a sound. It'll ring in your ears, gives you a rest. Well, me and Soldier Blue, we don't know what to do. So we try to raise the old man on the horn. But the orders are to stay until the break of day. At least you want to learn a mountain scorn. They took their time at that. The flare fizzles on and on and on and on. revealing all the gore you'd ever want. And even in my dreams, I'm still tortured by their screams, sanity's fine threads forever taut. They took their time at dying, and me and Blue were crying. Shuddering, we held each other tight. Salt and sulfur tears aged dust beyond our years, till finally the dawn displaced the night. We scurried up that hill, and though we'd had our fill, the company got in a firefight. And but an hour into doom, F-11s start to swoon, and Chuck had had enough of Mama's might. With the wounded dusted off, their rotors beating soft, the CO sends for our report and sends my squad back down to take a look around. I go, but man, I'm way too fucking short. The hill's 1062, and baby, what a view. It's the first I've had to take a look around. When climbing up this rock, you're looking down a lot, concentrating on each step of ground. We made it down okay to the 13 NBA, their face a quick relief of Holocaust, their lips in frozen bray. A cry they'd never say. For them, the war was over, battle lost. One was just a teen, his body small and lean. I remember when I looked now at my son. I remember way back when this kid named something Chen commanded him a whole battalion. We picked their bodies clean, but carefully did glean. It's just like them to die on a grenade. And then planted one or two between death and morning's dew, and slipped away from that grotesque charade. Blue must have hit abort. He never made report, just wandered off alone into the bush. And his mama to this day still calls him MIA. But you and me, we know he had a push. So don't wait up for your sons. For them, the war is done. I think it's safe to say they won't be home. But the thought you might employ when you think about your boy, wherever he may walk, he's not alone.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And then you think about all the ambushes and all the blues that you just wrote about. That experience, that heavy, heavy, heavy freaking dirt of the soul experience that people can't relate to, but you give them the dose of harsh combat reality. Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's pointless to apologize for my loss of equanimity, but most of this stuff that I wrote in a psychiatric institution, which is in itself is an important part of my story. When I got home from my second tour, I was strapped to the, a stretcher, on a C-141 and flown back to a psychiatric base in Pennsylvania. Valley Forge, as a matter of fact, Phoenixville, Valley Forge Army Hospital. Anyway, the first doctors that tried to treat me told me that my expressions of the war were much too violent, and that I needed to take massive quantities of chemicals in order to talk about my combat experience. And I think he doubled the quantity when I told him, I says, if I could make you hemorrhage and bleed from every orifice, I said, maybe then I could talk about Vietnam in a conversational tone.
When you can be eloquent about these horrific things, then I truly believe that that's like one of the major first steps of healing and recovery, right? You know, how do
Right?
we find ourselves in that situation? You know, no human being should be there.
Well, that's the other half of the story. You see, that was only the beginning. You know, like I went back to the day room. I don't know how many months passed, you know, of me sucking my socks, you know, and in this army hospital. And the book cart went by, and it was a book of poetry that fell off the cart right at my feet.
Well, imagine that, you know,
Right?
divine intervention, right?
and and the name of the book was The White Hotel, and it was by Sigmund Freud's lover's mother. Dr. Freud had seduced this woman's son, and she got so pissed off she wrote a book about it. But anyway, it I don't remember what I read. You know, it wasn't that I read it all. It was that it opened up the window that I didn't have to speak my truths. I only had to write them. And in order to entertain myself, I made them rhyme.
Awesome.
When did you start writing these? Obviously, was it when you were in the psychiatric?
Well, yeah, it was most of them were in one facility or another. You know, as as my PTSD progressed, you know, and my alcoholism took off, and you know, I gave up trying to medicate my wound. I started writing about it, and as a matter of fact, I was in this really high class psych facility up in upstate New York near Saratoga, and I was writing incessantly in my room, and the staff were concerned. They called in a Skidmore professor from Skidmore University, a professor of poetry, that asked his advice on what to do with this crazed veteran, right? It was the first time I'd ever made a poet cry. He talked to me probably for 45 minutes or an hour, I don't know. But when he left, they asked him, they said, what do we do with him? He said, just leave him alone. He's almost done.
Yeah, like a rebirth. Dan has written some pieces. And one of them that sticks out to me is a piece that he wrote on Bob Hope.
Okay.
You know that piece, Dan?
Yeah, I've got it here.
Can you share it?
Yeah, the title is Long Been, and it's just a short recounting. It begins, hope. What a great name. If one prevailing emotion permeated the ether, that was it. It's when hope devolved to fate that I needed recalibration. The intermittent cheers heard in the distance were obscene by their incongruity, their lack of context, their insensitivity. I thought about attending the show, just a quarter-mile stroll down the dirt road, but nothing seemed right about it. Was it exhaustion from willing away the endless barrage of mortars and rockets over the prior 3 nights? Was it today's price from celebrating our arrival at a safe port of refuge last night. No, that wasn't a problem. One more cold beer would have solved that. Was it the learned wartime vulnerability of large groups in small places? Perhaps 2,000 GIs made an inviting target for sure. Did my sore thumb appearance cause me hesitation? My fatigues had 4 days of wear, and they showed it. Even I noticed the smell. My breeches would stand on their own if unattended. Large witness stains revealed every crack and fold of my sweating body, where laterite clay dust met wet clothing you made mud. No, that wasn't it either. My disheveled appearance was a source of pride when visiting Long Bend for a day. We were given wide berth of respect and latitude from the local troops and MPs. They still bloused and polished their jungle boots and wore clean fatigues. Many troops had Mama San peg the legs of their jungle pants. Skinny legs were in, a fashion statement from a world of sameness. It was a small but welcome refuge. Maybe I just didn't want any attention today. Was I tired of high energy surroundings and I only needed some peace? Did I just walk to talk to myself for a while? Did I just want? A chorus of wolf whistles pierced the din, announcing the bathing beauties had made their appearance. This was obscene in the traditional sense. I had not seen a round-eyed girl since R&R in Hawaii 6 months earlier. Your imagination is probably better than a real show, I lied to myself. With that, I donned my flak jacket and pushed the start button. I glanced at the empty passenger seat to ensure my rifle was at hand. The big diesel complained, then fired to life with a loud roar, belching an enormous cloud of black smoke. The sound of that big Cummins was life-saving music to me. It was my threat and my salvation. Awaiting the air compressor tank to charge, I rolled a joint.
Yeah.
So
Very good, very good.
it was just inspired by the incongruity of celebration of any kind in that, and maybe the least deserving of celebration we're celebrating. I don't know.
Yeah, you go from one environment to a totally different environment, and it brings to mind that Vietnam veteran SF guy Barry Sadler, who wrote a song called "The Garrett Trooper," and here Barry Sadler was this Green Beret who had, seen the elephant, which you guys talk about, and he'd go back to the rear and he'd see these not paratroopers, he'd see these garrison troopers, these Garrett troopers, and they were always spit shined and polished and telling bullshit war stories, and they had never been in the shit, right? And that's what that excerpt reminds me of, Dan, that you so eloquently put down the papers, that this juxtaposition of two worlds, and how Bob Hope somehow it just didn't seem right that these bathing beauties were out there with 2,000 cheering troopers, and here you are down in Long Bend just trying to get back to your team. It just, those are the rips in time that writers give to the world when they actually have the courage to sit down and share those stories of incongruity and an ambush in the middle of the night, in the Nam. That's what keeps guys like me going, to know that guys like you exist and that you have the courage to share your dirt with others. That's powerful stuff, man.
My first night in country was in Long Bend, and I wrote a poem about that. It was called Jesus in the Jungle. pretty good. It's short. I should be able to read this without a problem. So far from Buster Brown's and face of Fabergé, steepled fingers, lacy socks, and songs we learned to pray. The disconnect was so complete, the shower shoes on little feet, the shish kebabs of Viet meat, some nights still I tremble. Charlie hit the ammo dump. One pad, 1 click away, 4 clicks away, excuse me. Tet, my first night in country. It turned night into day. Our civvy undies turned to blue like a blacklight in the night. Outside, the sand leapt in the air, and then concussions arc. The billets bowed, but somehow hold, as shrapnel fell like rain. Thank God that none had weapons yet. The fear had us insane. Jesus Christ, said 40 men, uttered, cried in vain. But when it's raining shrapnel, it keeps prayers short and plain. I couldn't run for cover. It was raining death outside. But this is courage intro, Lord. You win. I failed the test. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. I think it's fair to say whatever God I'd brought to war was now so far away.
When I wrote my combat pieces, it was a way of me taking that third grader who had been assaulted and putting it in the context of a soldier, what that would be like. And, I'll share one quickly too. It's called NVGs, Cannot Take Away the Screams. And in a way, this was my way as an Army guy who had not seen combat to take my personal dirt and to put it into a poem or a written piece. Sometimes it was too easy, like a cakewalk. They'd sparkle green in the moon glow, and we'd light them up, mow them down. Strange. All the technology in the world could not drown out their screams. That's the hardest memory. And that's the end of that one. But listening to you guys as friends and Army brothers and just sojourners that have had their hands in the dirt drives me on. And that's why it's important, I believe, for us to never capitulate, to take that dirt or that soil of the soul, our souls, and to continue to work it and continue to tell the stories. And hopefully somewhere, the listeners here, thank you for being here, but hopefully somewhere on that sojourner's journey that we're able to impart some of that dirt to others and let them know that they're not alone, that there are brothers and sisters out there who have similar experiences and who will never give up on them.
Rick, right? Where does the dirt go? The soil.
Well, what the soil has to be there. It's like an elemental part of any building construction. You first have to have a good foundation, don't you? And I think that we can all agree that the house cleaning that we have to do as combat soldiers or as veterans or as just participants in filling your existential threat here, there's just so much going on that I happen to have been exposed to a woman who is she's probably got a doctorate of some sort. I'm not sure what. She's quite disabled herself. she's got Alzheimer's and Asperger's and things that disrupt the clarity of our conversations. But she insists that my interpretation of the soil of our soul is too poetic, and it lacks wisdom, and it's where we dispute, because I feel that for us to reach the number of individuals that are necessary for some sort of a regeneration, a remediation of our physical soil, begins with the remediation of our spiritual soil, our soul. And so, like there are different aspects to our soul and the soil of our soul that require some attention. Our self-esteem, our self-worth, the guilt, the shame, the addiction, whatever aspects are keeping us from loving ourselves enough so that we can communicate that love to others successfully through their soil of their soul, is one that is going to take some practice and some investigation and some deep soul searching that I haven't done myself. I mean, like I know that there's a couple of things. Brene Brown brought out a brilliant statement that I've taken to heart. She says, "You are worthy of love and connection. The caveat being, you are responsible to the man in the glass to affirm that worth of love and connection, even when you can't get it from the world." And that rang my bell.
It brings to light when I that's awesome. When I think about the global population, I know that I've had this discussion with Dan quite a bit. The experts suggest that up to 70% of the global population has experienced one traumatic event. May not be combat. It could be the loss of a dream job. It could be being bullied as a young person. It could be being disfigured from an automobile accident. Whatever it is, they suggest, and they suggest that most people have never dealt with that, that trauma on that journey of self-discovery. But the one that really gets me, they suggest that up to 40% of the global population has experienced prolonged multiple traumas. So when I think about that, I think about a global population that's target rich and people trying to figure it out. And what you bring to mind, Rick, is how it almost becomes a responsibility for those that start to self-actualize. It's almost a human gauntlet being thrown down, that we have to find that connection first with ourselves. Obviously, if we don't love ourselves, how in the hell are we ever going to love anybody else? But when we find that love and we're responsible to that guy or that gal in the mirror, I believe it's almost a commission. Take that pain. Dan does it in music and essays. You do it with poetry. People may do it in their artwork or whatever. We've seen some incredible pieces of work and oil from people that have experienced combat trauma. And I think as artists, as soil diggers, as guys with dirt on their fingers, I almost think it's that commission. I think that's what we do as human beings first, but as responsible human beings. And Rick, man, brother, Dan knows that's a tough journey, man. That takes real courage to do that.
It takes a lot of investigation too. It's not something that it's like honesty or like truth. Like we sometimes only get it in small doses because that's all we can stand. That's all we can process it at one time. It's like, thank God we don't get it all at once. It's like it would be overwhelming for anyone. I mean, as we look at our responsibility, is not too light of a word, as elder warriors, it's to communicate in an effective fashion these parameters that we don't have any role models. We don't have anybody to teach us what to do. It's like I articulated, I got mad at my father for years, and one of the joint wounds that we all have is we've recently lost over 1 million Americans. Thank you very much. And there hasn't been a day of mourning.
Yeah. When I think about the graphic for this episode, I found this Vietnam soldier behind me. You can see him on the graphic, but what you don't see lying in front is the body of his comrade, his buddy. And I started to think about what was going through his mind and what were his parents going to think about or go through when the message came back, when those guys come walking up to the door to tell them they lost their son in combat. And like you just mentioned, Rick, the 1 million Americans that we've lost to this virus, and that collective pain, that collective pain that everybody, most people can relate to just from being a human being ourselves.
Right.
Pain is something that we will never escape. I had a guy who lost his son in Iraq tell me, son was blown up, never had that closure. And he told me, he said, John, it doesn't get any better. What happens is it gets different as I start to learn how to cope better with that event, that tragic event when I lost my son in Iraq. And that's I think that's the point of all of this existence at times, is this interconnectedness, these different levels of self-actualization and being committed in an odd sense, I guess, or maybe a good sense, to making things better for others. And I think about that when I was in the 3rd grade, that I never wanted anything like what happened to me ever happen again. And of course, the drugs and alcohol over the years eased the pain, but it never allowed me to self-actualize until really these later stages of my life. And that call to the crisis hotline, as I was thinking about ways to off myself, should I just go across the interstate median here and run into that 18-wheeler and what's that going to accomplish? And I thank God every single day for the young lady who was on the end of that phone call, who was honest with me and who listened and who said, you know what, we can't save your marriage, but we can save you. And that alone was enough of a catalyst. That woman, girl, I don't even know who she is or what she was, but she was on a suicide hotline because she listened to me for almost an hour. I felt like I had a sense of worth. And that's what started the journey. And of course, I met you years later. I met Dan 6 years ago in a guitar class, in a basic, how do we play a guitar? And Dan had his hair in a ponytail and I was wearing a veteran shirt. He comes up to me and I'm like, who is this old hippie? I'm thinking this, right? And he goes, so you're a veteran? And I said, yeah. Found out that he was Army combat engineer who had been to the Nam and spoke the same language. But from looking at him, I thought he was just a burned out hippie from the 60s who wanted to pick up the guitar. And so we never know whose path we're going to cross, but we better get ready to give a witness.
Yes.
Because that witness can be the difference between saving somebody's life or not. And Dan, in a certain odd way, was part of the journey to save my life. And I've looked up to him. And then when I got your book, Rick, was another part of my journey that drives me on, man. What can I say? There's these warriors out there that make me feel like I'm on something really bigger than myself. So thank you guys for being there for me in this stage of my journey. I appreciate it. And I mean that.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, we appreciate you. I mean, I can say I appreciate you. There's a when we first met, we exchanged titles and we bought each other's book, and I hope that someday I can sit down with you, and because I've written notes to ask you questions about the depth of your poetry. Your journey is remarkable in as much as your expressions show an insight that is beyond where combat took me. I appreciated that right from the early pages.
Well, thank you for that.
Well, this is kind of a culmination of, I spent 10 years as the lead coordinator for Soldiers Heart Volunteers, and as we face the continuation of the 22 and a half a day that still commit suicide, and that's only in the 28 states that report suicide statistics, by the way. So that number may be even higher. Anyway, I wrote this prayer. It's called the Warrior's Psalm from Vietnam. Take hold, weary warrior, for we who sense your doubt. Take hold, for your recovery is what ours about. Hear me, silent soldier. We know well the horrors of war, the truth of that been said. An empty consolation if spoken to the dead. We can only promise you must stay alive to realize the purpose of soldiers who survive. Yes, we're all expendable, a maddening, hopeless fate. To give up, though, a greater sin, to self-capitulate. We warriors know the dues of war, a burden quite enough. We need you now to hear this cry, of death I've had enough. The burden of your private hell is only painful now. A psychic exorcism, a purging you must allow. It doesn't mean you're going mad, and here's the litmus test. The wicked never know your pain, so troop, give it a rest. The challenge now to stay alive, to keep that first, protected, and day by day to face the ways we all have been affected. The newness of the pain you feel, the anguish of your soul, as broken as you might feel now, you'll once again be whole. I don't suggest the sorrow and the sadness won't return, but the crippling desperation will teach you to discern. The passion you young warriors feel has you doubt your worth. You've already died 1,000 deaths. It's time now for rebirth.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Another great poem. Thank you for listening, those who are still with us. And your mind does matter and you matter. And we all have this soil of our souls, and we all have dirty fingers, and the dirty fingers are those pains and those trials and those tribulations. But, use those dirty fingers. This is just me, as a badge of honor, because in the working of that soil, you've made that connection. And this moment, this rip in time that we have right now here on this technological conversational tool we use called Zoom, this connection right now makes everything worthwhile. And even if it was only us three who existed, I know that at this point in time, everything that I've ever lived for has been worth it. So, Dan, any closing thoughts? Or, I'm looking forward to the next conversation. This is
there's a lot of irony on the subject of the soil of the soul. I attended college and graduated with a degree in engineering. And ironically, the degree that I held was in civil engineering in a branch that was called soil engineering. and basically it was, how do I build a foundation for this bridge or whatever? How much from an engineering perspective can the soil stand before either too much subsidence or outright failure? So that's a little ironic to me. I mean, it lights a light that I'm going to have to look at a little further. And another is the soil is what brings us life. That's where we grow our food. That's, it has many purposes. And all I got to say, guys, is thanks for the food for thought. This has been an experience.
And honored and humbled to have you guys share pieces of your soil with my own. And that is a good metaphor and analogy, that the soil is everything. It's the foundation, like Rick says, it's the foundation of our lives. And as you say, Dan, it's the foundation of a project. Whether we're human or man-made, we still need to work that soil. And all I can say is thank you very much. And until next time.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dan. It's nice meeting you.
Likewise. Well, we already know each other. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Mind Matters. Use your critical thinking. Use logic and reason. Make your own determinations on the critical issues. Stay alert. Stay alive.